Well, hello there and welcome back to the Business of Becoming podcast. I'm your host, Lori Kennedy, and this is episode number 46. I was a bit fangirling in this episode, even though Marni Wasserman was one of our featured speakers at the Wellness Business Summit a few years back. I was really excited to talk to her about her personal and her business journey. She is someone who is really in the public eye and has navigated many big changes in her own personal health and business journey with so much courage and so much grace. I was so glad when she said yes to this conversation because I am someone who is super nosy and I wanted to know the behind the scenes scoop. Simply said, Marni's life is rooted in healthy living, not only a nutritionist and chef, but also the co-host of the Ultimate Health podcast. She is also the author of Fermenting for Dummies and Plant-Based Diet for Dummies. Marni uses passion and experience to educate individuals on how to adopt a real food diet and a balanced lifestyle through simple strategies. Everything that Marni and I talk about in today's episode can be found over on our show notes at thewbh.com/46. So without further ado, let's bring Marni to the show. Hey Marni, thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
So this is a long time coming and I honestly feel like I know you really, really well. One, because we run in the same sort of circles, and two, because social media is like a really funny thing. I think when you watch somebody's stories all the time and you like see them on social media, that I feel like I intimately sort of have watched your journey over time and have been really inspired by what you've done just by, I assume, listening to like your gut instincts. So before we dive in and you can share a little bit about that, why don't you just tell everyone who doesn't know who you are already, like who you are and what you do?
Okay. Well, what I do now versus what I did. So
Right?
I'll
Yeah.
do a quick overview because I'm sure we're going to get into it. So my background is my previous background is in kinesiology and health sciences, and then I became a nutritionist. And those two worlds allowed me to do cooking classes, which was a huge part of how I started my business. And I was, and still am, very passionate about food, and I really wanted to get the educational component out to people by showing people how to eat well, how to live well. And I did that for many years. I started out in my parents' home, and then I opened up a cooking school, the food studio, and I was able to educate people for many years doing that. Over the years, things have shifted, and I am now, just like you, doing a podcast. And the podcast has become the staple of my business and what I'm doing day to day. It's a big focus for myself and Jesse. Of course, I get the chance now to infuse a lot of my knowledge from health and nutrition and well-being into that, and I have the chance to also create other things out of that. So I'm having a lot of fun with it, and it's been awesome. It's been awesome. But to wrap it up in a nutshell, my background's in nutrition, culinary. I became a chef as well, and as well as personal training. So that's kind of the background.
And how, like, so my decade in this has been like, my journey has been like a decade. Like I never did corporate. I never did any of that. So I guess I officially became a personal trainer in 1999, and that's what I've been doing since. How long have you been doing this for?
So this has been over 10 years, I'd say. So I started the business, I'd say in 2000, I think it was 8. I came back 2008, 2009. I came back from culinary school. So I went to the Institute of Holistic Nutrition, and then I went to culinary school. I came back and I said I want to teach cooking classes. So it's been over the span of about 10 years or so, which is crazy.
Crazy. Were you ever in Montreal at a period of time?
No.
Okay.
No.
So that was someone else. And the reason that I ask you that question is because, so rewind like 7 to 10 years, even rewind 5, maybe even rewind 3. Could you ever imagine in your wildest dreams that like this would be where you are at now in your journey?
No. I really had no idea that I would become a podcaster. I didn't know that I would take things to the online world. I was so committed to the in-person. That's what I knew best after being a personal trainer for many years, and then having the cooking classes. That's what the evolution I saw growing having a place where people can come. I would meet with people, in person and have that experience. And not only that, so I didn't think online was going to be a part of my life. And I also didn't know about podcasting. I didn't even understand what it was or its, you know, the technology of it or its impact on people. So it took me time to learn that. And I thank my partner in life and the podcast, Jesse, for getting me involved in that and showing me the ropes. But no, I had no idea I would go this way.
That's so amazing, because I know for myself too, like I kind of always chuckle. I'm like, if someone would have told me, 5 years ago, as I was like, or 7 years ago in the gym setting, like busting it to like all the different gyms to deliver my nutrition program, that there'd be like a week where I wouldn't have to leave my house and still run my business, I would have laughed so hard. And still have the impact. So I appreciate you sharing that, because sometimes I like chuckle to myself that we get to be able to do this now in such a way that it also supports like our own, our own happiness, our own time freedom, and like, so we can do what we want to do out into the world.
And that's exactly it. I think I didn't know what that was like. Being committed to somewhere, being committed to a brick and mortar business, you don't know that. You don't know that you can travel or maybe plan a family or all these things and what that time freedom could look like. And I'm so happy that I got to experience that, because although I did love running the business and I don't take that experience away at all, I loved every second of it. And I've learned so much having had a physical business, a brick and mortar, but understanding where that could lead and what the potential is, not only financially, but time freedom is unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about the first change that you experienced. So your eating has shifted a lot over your evolution. And I know for in my community, a lot of the health practitioners get really nervous about putting themselves out there and like really exposing themselves, because either they don't feel like they're perfect enough, or they don't, they're nervous about, well, what happens if I shift and change? Like, do I have to change my entire business? Will there be a backlash? And so it really stops them from exposing just authentically like where they are in that moment. So I know that you've gone through like a pretty solid evolution when it comes to your preferences and your health. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about like what that was like for you?
So it's interesting. When I started my business and opening up the food studio, I was vegetarian at the time. My focus was on plant-based nutrition, and so was my business. That's what I was teaching people, is how to put together plant-based meals. And I had become very passionate about that way of eating for years. And at the time in school, vegetarianism, raw food, that was hot. That was really big. That's what we were being taught, which is interesting because now it's like all about paleo. So at the time it was giving me the chance to really, get this message out to people, because I was infiltrated with it and I was passionate about it, and I felt great on a plant-based vegetarian diet. So I did that for many years, and it took about 5 to 7 years for me to start paying attention that there could be another way. And that came down to health challenges. I was starting to feel differences in my body that I wasn't feeling before: digestion, inflammation, other little signs and symptoms. I was like, wait, I don't get it. I was so healthy as a vegetarian. I've done everything right for so many years. So it can't be my diet. It's got to be something else. Do my digging, speak to different naturopaths, different specialists, and my blood work comes up and I'm getting some advice that maybe you want to consider bringing some animal protein into your diet. And I didn't listen for maybe 2 to 4 years. I don't think I listened. I just didn't think that that was it. And after listening to a lot of the guests that we've had on our podcast who've gone through similar experiences as me, being vegetarian or being involved in, different ways of eating and then paying attention to their body, I started to clue in. I'm like, okay, you know what? Let me see what's going on here, and let me at least open my mind up to the possibility that this might be something I have to shift, which was really difficult, really difficult. Having been a vegetarian for both moral, ethical, and health reasons, it was really hard to change that mindset. So it took time, but eventually I started to develop a little bit of a craving for eggs. And I let that sit with me for about a year. And then came fish and chicken. So it took time to really open up my mind to that possibility. But I checked in at every point, and I wanted to see how my body responded to that. And it was hard on a day-to-day basis to figure out what was going on. But once I went back in for lab work and saw that things were starting to change, I became, you know, committed to the fact that this is what needs to happen. My diet needs to change. And I looked at, what I was really eating and started to understand that grains and beans wasn't really fulfilling my body anymore. I found out that I had Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune thyroid condition, and that the diet I was eating could have been a partial contributor to that. So once you learn that about your body and your health, and you realize that you need to make those changes for better health and well-being, you can't really look back. And it was hard. Again, for the ethical reasons, it was really hard for me, but my health came first. 100% my health came first. So now I'm eating more of a paleo-ish diet. I don't like to use labels, but my diet comprises of animal protein, lots of good fat, lots of greens. There really isn't too much difference between, the nuts, beans, sorry, not the beans, the nuts, the seeds, the greens, the good healthy fats. That's all there. That's always been a staple. So now I've just kind of swapped out beans and grains for animal protein and fish, and I'm feeling a lot better. So I'm still in the process.
That's amazing. And, it I think we all go through evolutions, right? Like as we age, we're females, like things shift. And I appreciate the fact that you weren't like super, super rigid and you were open and you were listening. How did that affect your business? Because obviously what you began to talk about changed. And not that I've ever been a vegetarian, but I know from even speaking with like Leanne Vogel, who was like vegan to now obviously not, there's like a backlash, right? People follow you and look up to you and respect you and listen to you because they also buy in to that way of eating. And then all of a sudden you are now including animal protein and sharing that. How did that affect your business?
So, because it took me quite a few years to make that transition and kind of believe it for myself, it also took me a while to speak up about it. So, I didn't really publicly announce anything for a long time, but if people came to my cooking class and said, "Are you vegetarian?" I would be totally honest and say, "Not anymore. I'm eating a bit of chicken, eating a bit of fish." So, I'd say maybe two, but a couple of years after I probably made the switch, or maybe within a year, I started to share about it. And I think I wrote a newsletter, I put out a blog post, put it on Instagram, and I started slowly. I think I would just start with like a picture of like eggs with toast for lunch or whatever it was. And I was surprised that I didn't get as much backlash as I thought I would. If anything, I got more people coming out of the woodwork saying, "Wow, I'm so happy you stepped forward because I've been vegetarian for so many years. Now I'm thinking of including animal protein, and thank you for allowing this space for that. But I want to know more. I want to know why you made that switch. I've been following you for so long. I became vegetarian because you were vegetarian." So it was interesting just to see people kind of on the same trajectory and, making that change as well. I did get a few people who, of course, commented saying, "I thought you were vegan. I thought you were committed to this lifestyle. Why are you making this change?" But it was not as bad as I thought it would be. I was really pleasantly surprised by the happy and healthful responses that I got.
Were you afraid to post it? Was that like something that you thought about? Was it something that you were nervous? Like, take me through that process of
Yeah,
how you decided to share it and all of that stuff.
for sure. It was tough. I do remember a couple times I would take pictures of my meals and I'd be ready to post it, let's say on Instagram, because that's obviously the most visually displaying of what's going on in my life. And I'd be hesitant. And Jesse was like, "Be honest, be open, show people what's going on." People who don't want to follow along will drop off, and the people who do will. So I was really nervous. I do remember actually which picture it was. I could probably pull it up. And I just remember making that post, and that's the one that I did get a little bit of a mixed bag. I got some private messages where people were saying, I don't understand what you're doing, but I also got more of the response of, thank you so much. So once I started to see those positive responses, it gave me, the freedom and the commitment that I was doing the right thing. And I knew that I could keep doing that. And I did it intermittently. I would share about it. I'd write about it. And when I put out, I think it was my blog post, I shared a blog post called Real Food. Oh my gosh, I can't even think of the title of it. It's like my number one blog post, top download one right now. I think it was called Real Food and Real Life Transformation. And I just shared that whole experience from the studio to my diet and got really real with people. And the emails came flooding in. And again, overwhelmingly positive responses, which just made me so happy. And I got the chance to help people. I got the chance to give people, help them make that decision for themselves to better health. And it's interesting because the people who did email me saying, I don't understand, I became vegetarian because of you, I could now respond to them in a way and just say, you've got to do what's best for your body. You've got to find your own path, and you cannot just follow someone for what they're choosing to do. You have to really dig deep, which is what I had to do. So it was really interesting. It allowed some really interesting conversations to develop.
I think it's also really amazing that by sharing that process, you're really giving permission to people and really validating their own experience, by having them like look at examples in their own life and like how they're feeling and how they're going through, versus being like, nope, you're vegetarian and you must stick with this because this is the thing. And it doesn't matter what your blood work says. You need to, stick with that. And I think some people would, just because that's how dogmatic things work. And so by you sharing that, I think it was really brave of you, and to really hold that space for other people to allow themselves to sort of journey through whatever it was that was going on for them.
Right. And it was interesting timing too, because the food studio was coming to an end at that same time. So had I wanted to stay longer in my business, in that physical business, I would have probably changed the entire structure of what I was teaching. It would have become like Marni's paleo cooking classes. It would have been totally changed. So it was really interesting how that chapter closed at the same time. And it really allowed my messaging to be really consistent with where I was at and where I was going. So that also helped too with and speaking with people and sharing that.
So let's talk about that. Okay, so that chapter of like your evolution had dramatically shifted. Obviously, things were changing for you. Like, take me to that first time where you were like, I don't want to do this food studio anymore. Like, can I sell it? Can I close it? What would that even look like? Like, what initiated that feeling or that thought?
So probably at about 4 years into opening up the food studio. So to give you perspective again, so I ran the business 6 years out of my parents' home. So very little overhead costs. I ran, my business there. Is very lucky to have that opportunity. My parents were very, gracious to give me their home to do that. And I had strangers coming into their home for years doing this, but I could only grow so much. So I made the leap, opened up the food studio, and put it together from scratch, put a lot of time, money, and effort into creating it. So that changed the game of my business big time. I went from very little or to no overhead to a ton of overhead. And I knew what I was getting into, but you never know until you do it. And you can project as much as you want, but until like the monthly bills come in and you have, you got your staff, you've got the water bills, you've got electricity, all the fun stuff. You own a home, basically. It's crazy. So the first couple of years, I was like, okay, this is going to work, and I was successful. The business was running, the classes were full. I was having a lot of fun, but it got to a point where I was really starting to weigh out the energy I was putting in, the profit I was making, and then seeing that potential of the online world with the podcast. So it took time, just like the transition out of vegetarianism. It took time for me to kind of do the math, sit with it, think about it, look at how I was showing up, in my classes. Was my energy starting to shift away from that passion? And it was. And I started to realize I wasn't really serving the people the same way I wanted to be. I wasn't feeling as fulfilled at the end of the day. And it was taxing me, financially and physically. So I made the commitment that within a year, I would try to get out of my lease. So I had a 5-year lease. So in year number 4, I decided to put it out there that if I can get this on the market, I didn't own the space, I was leasing it. So if I could get it leased for the last year of my lease and then get out of there, that'd be great. And that's a big leap of faith because I'm committed in there. What are the chances someone's going to come in and take over my lease for the last year? But I was done. Like I made that decision. So I think it was in the fall of, I guess, 2016. I think I put it out on Facebook because I figured there's got to be someone out in my community who wants to take over a beautiful, stunning kitchen. And there was a ton of people interested. But again, once you run numbers by people, they're like, oh, I didn't realize it was that much.
Right.
But once I put
especially with the location that you were in too, right?
I know, Midtown Toronto.
Yeah.
So I put the word out. The response was very positive, but it took a long time to finally nail someone down. And by March, which was, the year of my lease to the final year. So March 1st, I got someone in there by March 1st, which was amazing. So it wasn't the easiest process, but it worked. I'm very lucky and very grateful that I got someone to take it over. And it's funny timing because I'm still just wrapping it up because now the lease is over. The subtenant did not choose to stay in there, which I thought she was going to continue on. So now I've got to just close everything up. So it's still hanging on by a thread. I'm at the tail end of it now. Hopefully in a month from now, it'll be totally behind me. But it was, it was a difficult process, but it was a necessary process. And once I made that decision, I was so happy with it.
So what were some of the biggest lessons that you learned from having that space and that business?
So being able to run a physical space as a one-person show, like I didn't have a partner, I didn't have anyone else doing it. I had me and my assistant a couple part-times. You have to be able to show up every day. And, you're the one unlocking the door. You're the one closing the door. You're the one taking out the garbage and the trash and cleaning up. So you have to be 100% committed to that day in, day out. So that's just showing up to the business. Then there's the showing up for your staff and for yourself and making sure you can create your schedule every day. And then I had to show up for my classes. So there's so many different layers to the whole process. So I had my classes, which typically ran in the evening, and that's who I was. That's Marni's element. That's what I know best, is how to show up for a cooking class and teaching. Running the business and the day-to-day and maintaining it all, it's all great, but I wouldn't say that was like my skill set. There are people who love to do that and who are really good at that. So being able to tie all those knots together, in the beginning, I knew what I was getting into again. But I think after, 3-4 years, I started to realize, what, this is not what I want to be spending my time doing. What am I good doing? Teaching, talking, educating people. That's where I need to put my efforts. So I learned how to really distinguish, what my skill sets were, what really made me happy. And I would be totally happy to teach a cooking class now. I just don't need to run the whole show. Just part of the show.
Right. Like for fun.
For fun. Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Where I could walk away and the profits go in my pocket and I can just do what I do best and not have to worry about who's cleaning up after and, who's paying the bill at the end of the month.
Yeah, totally. I totally get that. Was there ever a part of you, because I know that this happened with me when I decided to end my quote unquote like nutrition, being like a registered holistic nutritionist, there was an identity that went along with that for me for sure. And I still don't actually know what to call myself, because I don't resonate with being a business coach, because I actually have no formal training in business whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't run a nutrition business. So I'm just going by Lori these days. But was there how did you handle that? Because I know for me, it was an identity shift. It was really a closing of a book, not even just a chapter. But for me, it was for 7 years, day in and day out, like you, I was the wow girl. That's what I was. That was my business. I was nutrition. It was my identity. So did you feel that sense of loss, or I don't know, emptiness, or just, did you have a closing ceremony? How was that transition for you?
I think the hardest part was actually leaving the physical structure of what I created, because I put so much into that and it was such a gorgeous space. And the amount of work that it took to put it together, that I had to deal with all the contractors, and I didn't know anything about putting a space together. I've never renovated a home. I've never bought a house. So I had no knowledge of that, but yet I handled it all, like from beginning to end. So leaving that behind was really hard for me, and still is, because I'm still tied to it. So I'm going back to Toronto next weekend. I'm going to be seeing it again. That was the hardest part. On a second note, me running the cooking classes and leaving that, I think I was ready for that chapter to close. So when it did, I think it was timely and necessary. And I was, I think, done being known as Marni the plant-based chef. So where right now I'm kind of in limbo, where it's like I'm a podcaster, but I'm also so much more. And there's also, I think, new things that I want to create out of whatever that title is. So I'm kind of in this in-between phase right now, where I'm just kind of redefining everything that I'm up to. So yeah, to answer your question, I think I was ready for that chapter to close, but people were still confused, because the hardest part is the online community, right? When you have a website and you've got a Facebook page and people are trying to find you, and people are still trying to book cooking classes, they don't really know that it's closed, even though I announced it. That's difficult too. So I still get emails today saying, we want to throw a bachelorette party at your studio. We heard, you're the person to go to for all the cooking classes. And then me just having to, figure out how to let people know that's not what I do anymore. I'm on to new projects, and I'm going to be doing different things now. So that's been a really interesting part.
Yeah, so I appreciate you saying that, because I know for myself too, like, it really was this evolution of, okay, I'm done with this chapter. I felt just very much like you, like I could not hear one of my clients say the same thing like over and over again. And it just wasn't exciting to me. It didn't challenge me. I was bored. Not to be disrespectful, but it wasn't for me anymore. And I
Right.
knew that I had to make a transition. And I did something very similar to you. I said, okay, I'm going to get my online business to a place where I can leave my nutrition. And it did. It took me probably about 2 years where like I did both. You were podcasting, you were running the studio. I did both so that I could, pay the mortgage and keep the lights on. But I love the example, because I know a lot of people start out thinking that they're going to do one thing and then this is going to be it. But as we grow, our interests change, the industry changes. Like,
Mhm.
when we started, there was no podcasts, right? There was no online
There's no
anything.
Instagram.
There's no Instagram, there's no Facebook Live, there's no Facebook
Yeah.
groups. Like, none
Yeah.
of it existed. And I love your example, because you're fluid, right? And I think, and I don't know, so I won't speak for you. I know, at least for me, I have no idea what my business will look like in 5 years from now. And
100%.
I used to be married to the idea that I was like a nutritionist and this is what I was going to do. And I know better now. Do you feel the same?
Totally. Totally. Like, even when I first started my business, I thought I was going to do catering and consulting, and then it turned into cooking classes. And here I am now. And yeah, I have no idea what 5 years down the road will look like, even 2 years.
Yeah. And I think that's amazing. And I also think that you have to be a certain kind of person to be okay with that, right? To like really trust in the process and trust that wherever podcasting leads for you, it will lead to the next evolution of Marni, right?
Totally. I totally agree. And I'm so grateful that I had the podcast at the time to fall into, because had I just lost the passion and the drive to run my cooking classes, and I had nothing else in between to kind of fall back on, that would have been really tough. That would have been really tough. It was hard enough just still continuing to teach classes when my heart wasn't in it anymore, but to know that I still had something else that was building up was awesome. So, if we are giving advice here, I would say, just like you said, having something starting in the background while you're making a transition can make that transition, more seamless.
Yeah. And for people listening to this, they're thinking like, a podcast can be a business? What? So do you want to just share a little bit about what that looks like? You don't have to like dive into the personal details, but like
Right.
there's a lot of people out there who, to my surprise, still don't really believe in the whole online thing, who are like, how can that even be a business? Like, what do you mean you have a podcast? Like, do you want to just share for those people who maybe don't ever want to work with clients, or who don't want to have like a full online brand or be an influencer or whatever? What does your, I'm going to use quote unquote business around podcasting look like now?
Sure. So it's again interesting because I think when Jesse and I started the podcast, I don't think we thought it was going to be a business. We had a passion for it. Jesse was like so into getting this podcast off the ground just to get our health message out. And lo and behold, it took about 2 years, I think maybe even a year and a half, for it to start to generate some income, which is through sponsorship. And as we start to see that potential and through affiliates and sponsorship and where the show was going, we started to realize, you know what, we can maybe make the switch. He was a chiropractor, I was running my business, and we knew we both, he, same as me, wanted to get out of it. He was in the same position, different profession. His heart fell out of it, didn't want to practice anymore. So we needed to find a way that we were going to make money without having to spend as much money. So it took time. And that business model kind of fell into our lap through sponsorships. And that is our, bread and butter right now. As we start to develop more programs and content and things that we're doing over time, as we're building up our brand, we've got lots of things in the works. So it just, again, depends on where your skill set lies, where your passion lies for what you want to do and how you want to utilize it. So we're still figuring that out. But right now we do have our business run off of sponsorships. Should I recommend that is the way to go? Probably not. We kind of got lucky just the way that, our path went. But first of all, podcasting, as you know, it's not an easy business. It's not easy to get, people listening to your show and to grow it. And we did get very lucky early on. Jesse, again, he knew how to work the system. He knew how to get it, SEO'd and into the right directories and all that good stuff. But it's hard to tell people, just like YouTube or whatever, a blog, any other online business, to just go into it because it's going to make you a lot of money. You have to work at it. You have to know what you're doing. You have to be patient. We are almost 4 years into the podcast now. And it's just at this point, like just this year, can we say like we are making an income off of it. And this is our business. And now we're going to do offshoots and create more. But just now did it get to that point.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm just going to repeat it, 4 years.
Yeah.
Like, just so people really get, you know what I mean? Because they're like, ooh, and I'm super open and honest. And I'm like, yeah, you better be okay playing the long game, because you're not making 6 figures in 5 minutes. Like, it's just not going to happen.
No.
No matter what sort of business model, even on the internet where there's like lots of unicorns, it's just not, especially when you're starting from scratch, with no community, no following, and all of that stuff. So I appreciate you being super, super honest with that. I feel the same. I feel like, I ended my nutrition business at the end of 2014. So it's really only been like a couple years doing this full time online. I started in 2012, and I feel like only just now do I really actually understand what I'm doing.
Right.
Like, do I really feel, 5 or 6 years later, do I really feel like, yeah, okay, like I got this? And I still don't know where I'm going to be in 5 years, but I feel like in this moment today, like, yeah, I feel good about, my role in my own company.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a huge learning curve. I mean, we all went to school for nutrition. Let's just be honest. Like, we know food.
Yeah.
I don't have a formal business background. Like, it's a huge learning curve.
Yeah. And then the technology, especially with podcasts, or if you're YouTubing, or if you're blogging, like just to even be able to know the back end of a website, like it all takes time and effort, and it does cost a lot of money depending on what you're doing. Like podcasting equipment, it's very low overhead, but website redesign, launching programs, it all looks sexy on the outside, but we all know from the inside, there's a lot of work and a lot of time and effort that goes into it. If you want to do it right, anyone can put out a program, but if you want to do it right and you want to make that 6-figure income, you got to put that time and effort into it. And it might take you a year to create that course or that product or whatever it is, or more. So you got to be patient.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. This has been amazing. Where can people go to find out about the podcast?
The Ultimate Health Podcast. So you can just subscribe on iTunes, or you can check us out on Instagram at Ultimate Health Podcast. And I'm also very active on Instagram as well at Marni Wasserman.
Yeah, perfect. And she does. She posts like all the time. I love watching your stories and just about what you're eating and all your like little lifestyle hacks and your dog. Super cute.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing. Thanks everybody so much for listening, and we will talk to you again soon. Bye.